on the challenges facing inmates when they leave prison, we're joined by Steve Raphael. He's the co-author of the book, Why Are So Many Americans in Prison? And he's also a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, President Obama has issued a directive instructing federal employers to delay asking about a job applicant's criminal history until later on in the application process. And we're seeing this trend spread, removing the question of a conviction history in the private job sector as well. Target, Home Depot, Walmart have already banned the so-called box on job applications. What do you think of this movement?
Well, over the last 30 years, there's been such a large increase in our incarcerated population and the number of people, primarily low-skilled minority men, that have cycled through those institutions, that if we have those boxes and employers are using them to summarily exclude people from consideration, it just permanently puts a very large minority of people at a permanent and severe disadvantage. So it's a good thing to be individualizing more in considering people's qualifications when they apply for jobs.
So what impact do you think removing the criminal history question in the initial application will have on the labor market at large then?
Well, on the labor market at large, probably not much. I think for the subset of people who have severe criminal histories and sometimes not serious criminal histories as well, what it does is it gives them a chance to get in the door and to make a case. I think most people who advocate for ban the box don't advocate to completely eliminate the ability to look to review someone's criminal history records, but to wait until the person is a serious candidate before that background check takes place. And so that way the candidate has a chance to show their good side, things that they've done since they've been convicted, if they've gone to school or if they've been out for a long time and they haven't had any problems. That kind of mitigating information seems to actually impact employers' decisions.
Right, and certainly gives them more of a chance, as you say. Now, America is the world's leader in incarceration. There are more prisoners per capita in the U.S. than any other country. Why is that?
Well, that wasn't always the case. So if we go back in time about 4 decades, we had an incarceration rate that was basically in line with most of Western Europe and the rest of the world. What happened starting in the 70s, 80s, and 90s is Congress and state legislatures across the country passed a series of laws that basically made sentencing tougher. And it both applied prison to people who we wouldn't have applied prison in the past, and for people that we do send to prison, we send them there longer. And collectively, these policy changes have just ballooned our incarceration rate, if we add prisons and jails together, from about 150 per 100,000 and now 750 per 100,000. And indeed, we have the highest incarceration rate in the world.
Now recognizing some of those tough laws like the 3 strikes and you're out, for example, and some of those tougher penalties imposed on drug charges in the 80s and 90s, there has been a movement for reform, and the Justice Department has released about 6,000 inmates from federal prisons along those lines to ease overcrowding. Why does this move make sense economically, and why has it received bipartisan support?
Well, I think part of it is the fact that the nation stands in stark relief to the rest of the world, that, we're many multiples every other Western European country and developed country in our use of incarceration, so that sort of prompts some soul searching. But I think also is pretty good evidence that beyond a certain level, it's not very effective at controlling crime, and in fact might have negative effects on crime in the sense that people sort of are changed by a prison experience. It could permanently damage their employment prospects and also make them more prone to engage in crime when they get out. So it's not necessarily good policy on that front. And then I think the third important issue is it has such a disparate impact on minority communities and on African American males and Latino males in particular. And it just aggravates an already sort of salient social cleavage.
Well, one of the issues is, of course, the tax burden to the U.S. taxpayer. How much of an economic burden is incarceration in the U.S.?
Well, it depends, but it's probably today we're spending anywhere from 70 to 80 billion dollars on our prison system. If we were to add our jail population, it would be even higher. If we just looked at direct fiscal cost, we're in the neighborhood of 80 to 100 billion dollars. If we look at lost output of people who might be working, if they weren't in prison, it would be more. If we were to add to that the social costs to the families of inmates who are supporting their loved ones behind bars, traveling very far to visit them, and just having their lives disrupted, the numbers could be even larger. But yes, it does cost the United States a lot of money.
Certainly does. And one of the reforms is trying to help prisoners when they leave prison. And we have these prison rehabilitation courses that are offered to prisoners to help them get jobs like learning how to code and some other vocational skills. Now, Steve, some could argue that in a competitive labor market, this in a way disadvantages law-abiding citizens who can't afford this, and that along with removing the requirement to mention that you have a criminal history, former criminals may actually be better off than poorer but law-abiding citizens when it comes to looking for work. They get the education, and now they don't have to declare their criminal history. What would you say to that?
Well, I think most people who advocate for ban the box, first of all, don't advocate for completely sealing a criminal history record. It's usually if the record, the standard kind of best practice is that if it's relevant to the job, then of course the employer has to look. But to exclude people straight off the bat is not necessarily a good thing. I think another thing to keep in mind is people that are in prison are sort of a very, very, very select group of people. They tend to be very, very low income. They come from poverty. They have very low levels of education. Most haven't graduated from high school. Substance abuse problems are, the incidence of that are high. The incidence of mental illness is high. And so you have many, many, many disadvantages that even if they weren't in prison, they'd be in the bottom quartile of the earnings distribution of the lowest 20 to 25%. So, trying to help them become constructive, law-abiding citizens is in everybody's best interest. And of course, given that many of them are prime-age males, what's expected in society is that prime-age males work, and we have to get about the business of trying to make sure that they can enter and be productive members like anybody else.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there. Steve Raphael, co-author of the book, Why Are So Many Americans in Prison, and professor at the University of California Berkeley.